I want you to picture Repulse Bay in Hong Kong for a second.
Yeah, and even if you've never been, you probably know the exact vibe we're talking about.
Oh, totally. We are talking absolute luxury real estate. You've got this gorgeous, sun-drenched beach, couples taking romantic strolls.
People sipping, like, very expensive coffee on those European-style terraces.
Right. It looks like the ultimate peaceful escape from the city. Just completely pristine.
Well, it is curated perfection. I mean, it's a landscape specifically engineered to make you forget the rest of the world even exists.
Yeah, but that perfectly manicured facade is hiding some seriously intense history. So today we are taking a deep dive into a massive stack of sources.
We've got historical archives, urban planning records, post-war legal transcripts, and this absolutely fascinating academic report.
And all of it completely shatters that peaceful illusion. So our mission today is to peel back the expensive wallpaper of Repulse Bay and look at 5 incredibly distinct, invisible histories that are just hiding right there in plain sight.
Exactly. We're going to be looking at colonial power, wartime trauma, massive egos, and grassroots religion.
And what we are really tracking through all these sources is this broader concept of spatial power.
Right, how different groups of people, whether that's colonizers, billionaires, invading armies, or just everyday citizens, how they take control of physical space and reconstruct society in their own image.
It's so fascinating. And we are going to give you specific hidden gems to look for the next time you visit.
Yeah, we really want to transform your simple beach day into a whole new experience.
So let's just jump right in, because before you can build luxury, you have to claim the land. And to claim it, you have to name it.
But according to the archives we looked at, the English name Repulse Bay is essentially a colonial fiction.
Wait, really? Just totally made up?
Entirely fabricated.
Yeah.
I mean, if we go back to the beginning of the colonial era, the local Chinese population obviously didn't use that name.
Right.
The name was, and actually still is, in Cantonese era, which literally translates to shallow water bay.
Which makes perfect sense. It's a bay, the water is shallow.
Exactly. It is a purely physical geographic description.
Yeah.
It tells you exactly what the land is doing.
But the early British mapping of this area was just an absolute mess.
Oh, total disaster.
And
In 1841, you had Royal Navy Commander Edward Belcher trying to map the coast, and he totally botched it. He mistakenly labeled this massive beach as Chonghome Bay.
which is actually the name of a completely different bay nearby.
Right. So right from the start, you have this profound disconnect between the reality of the landscape and the colonial administration that is trying to control it.
They're just drawing lines on maps without actually understanding the ground they're standing on.
Exactly. But the name that eventually stuck is Repulse Bay.
Now, if you take a walking tour today or talk to locals, the popular myth is that in 1841, the Royal Navy supposedly repulsed a massive pirate fleet right there in the bay.
Which sounds incredibly epic.
It really does. But the academic report we're looking at points out that if you check the actual British Admiralty records from that time, well, there is zero evidence that any such battle ever happened.
Yeah, it's a phantom battle. It is completely absent from the official logs.
Okay, but what about the ship? There's that second myth.
Right. The claim that the bay was named after a specific warship called the HMS Repulse. But researchers dug into the naval registries, and while there were a few ships named Repulse in the 19th century...
Which you'd expect. It's a common Navy name.
Yeah, but the most famous 1868 version mainly served on the west coast of the Americas and in British waters. There are absolutely no records of it ever dropping anchor in shallow water bay.
Okay, so wait. If there were no pirates repulsed, and no ship called Repulse, where on earth did the name actually come from?
Well, the archival trail leads to an 1845 map drawn up by a Royal Engineers lieutenant named T.B. Collinson. And it seems he just picked the word repulse out of thin air.
Just because it sounded cool.
Basically because it sounded intimidating. I mean, map making isn't just about drawing coastlines for navigation. It is an assertion of hegemony.
Meaning it's like a psychological tool to show who is in charge.
Exactly. The British in 1845 were extremely anxious about security and control in the early days of the China trade. They were vastly outnumbered in a strange land.
So by stamping a highly militaristic, aggressive word like repulse onto the map, Collinson was just projecting British power.
He was literally writing a threat into the landscape to ease colonial anxieties.
Wow. It's like moving into a new neighborhood, putting up a sign on your front lawn that says Dragon Slayer Manor just to intimidate the neighbors.
Yeah.
And then just letting everyone invent a heroic backstory to justify why you called it that.
That is the perfect analogy.
But why does the public so easily accept the fake pirate story? I mean, why didn't anyone question it?
Well, because humans are just hardwired for narrative. Once a name is officially codified and accepted by society, we have this innate tendency to invent stories that justify the name.
Right, repulse sounds like a violent action. So people naturally reverse engineered a heroic, swashbuckling origin story.
Exactly. A pirate battle perfectly fits the psychological profile of a British colonial hero.
So here is the first hidden gem for you to look out for. The next time you are standing on the sand at Repulse Bay, don't just look out at the water.
Yeah, turn around and look up at the steep towering hills right behind the beach.
Because to 1845 mapmakers like Collinson, those weren't just pretty hills to look at, right?
No, at all. They used those exact peaks as crucial observation stations to calculate Hong Kong's exact longitude and latitude.
So those hills were the literal front line of mapping and claiming the empire.
And once that conceptual claiming was done on paper, the physical claiming began. The wealthy realized they could weaponize this geography for their own benefit.
Right, so the British build this exclusive society, but they also bring their own, like, deep-seated paranoias.
Oh, absolutely. In the early 20th century, the colonial government was terrified of disease, specifically bubonic plague outbreaks.
So they actually used public health as a justification to codify physical segregation. The records highlight the 1904 Hill District Reservation Ordinance.
Yes, and the mechanism here is crucial. They didn't just say, hey, we want to live away from the locals.
Yeah, it would be too obvious.
Right. They weaponized medical fears to legally ban the Chinese population from living in certain elevated, highly desirable areas. They essentially argued that keeping the races apart was just a matter of sanitary necessity.
That is incredibly dark. So they create this legally segregated, pristine space. And into this environment steps the Kadoorie family,
Right. The Kadoories were part of the Baghdadi Jewish diaspora.
which means they were part of a deeply influential, globe-spanning network of merchants and industrialists originating from Baghdad.
Yeah, who had established immense wealth across Asia. Eli Kadoorie had learned the ropes of long-term asset building from the famous Sassoon family in Shanghai.
So he looks at this isolated, remote bay in Hong Kong and envisions an elite English enclave.
He does.
But hold on. The records say getting to Repulse Bay back then was a complete nightmare. It was a multi-hour boat trip.
Yeah, not an easy commute.
If you were a billionaire trying to build a luxury hotel, why there? I mean, why not build it closer to the city center where all the money is?
Because to the ultra-wealthy, the isolation wasn't a bug, it was the feature. The sheer difficulty of getting there acted as a natural filter. It guaranteed that only people with immense leisure time and resources could access it.
But of course, the Kadoories still needed a way to get their wealthy clients there comfortably.
And this is where the sheer audacity of capital comes in. In 1918, a man named James Taggart, who was negotiating for the Kadoories, goes to the colonial government with a wild deal.
He basically says, we will build a world-class luxury hotel out there, but only if the government pays to build the roads.
And the government actually agreed.
Which is wild.
I know. That deal resulted in the Stanley Road in 1919 and Stubbs Road in 1924, cutting a grueling boat trip down to a breezy 30-minute drive.
It is a perfect example of how private capital dictates public infrastructure. The Kadoories successfully leveraged their private project to get the government to subsidize their driveway, essentially.
They completely bent urban planning to serve their commercial interests.
And the hotel they built, the Repulse Bay Hotel, which opened in 1920, was absolutely wild. They hired the architectural firm Dennison, Ram, and Gibbs.
Yeah, they built this sprawling Edwardian structure and imported 2,000 living rose bushes all the way from Britain.
2,000.
2,000. They explicitly marketed it as the Menton of the East, comparing it to the French Riviera.
They were trying to create a totally manufactured reality. They wanted the tropical climate and the cheap labor, but absolutely none of the local culture.
Exactly. The luxury of that hotel was defined entirely by what it excluded.
A literal non-Oriental fortress. Which brings us to a really fascinating hidden gem for you to find.
Yeah, because that original 1920s hotel was actually demolished in 1982.
Right. Today, it's a massive modern luxury complex called the Repulse Bay. But if you look closely at the directory, you'll see two very deliberate design choices.
First, the four main residential towers are named Taggart, Hartson, Nicholson, and Doriku.
Those are the European elites who originally ran that segregated hotel.
Right, and the second detail is architectural. In the middle of the complex, there is a massive, gaping square hole in the building.
It's super famous. If you ask a tour guide, they will tell you it is a feng shui hole designed to let spiritual dragons fly from the mountains down to the sea without being blocked.
Which, I mean, is a brilliant piece of marketing.
Yeah.
But the urban planning documents tell a very different story.
A completely pragmatic one, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
That hole was a political compromise in modern high-rise planning.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the ultra-wealthy residents who lived up on the hills behind the new complex complained that a solid wall of skyscrapers would block their ocean views and lower their property values.
So the dragon story is just a localized mystical myth layered over a very calculated, very modern real estate concession to preserve visual corridor.
Exactly. It's all about property value.
Wow. So the British successfully build this exclusive European fortress, but you can't monopolize a landscape for long when there's rival capital right next door.
No, you really can't.
How did local billionaires respond to being physically boxed out by this colonial enclave?
They challenged it by building something even louder. And this brings us to the story of Yu Tongsen.
Right. He was a wildly successful Chinese tycoon who inherited a massive tin mining and pharmaceutical empire in Southeast Asia, the Yuan-Sang Empire.
But you might wonder, how could he challenge the British establishment? Was the colonial banks or the government just, shut him out?
Yeah, I would think they just block him legally or financially.
That is the power of transnational capital. Because his wealth was generated from tin mines and apothecaries across Malaya and Singapore, he wasn't entirely dependent on the local Hong Kong British banking system.
He had independent leverage.
Exactly. He represented a type of spatial monopoly that could cross racial lines. He had the cash to buy the land, and the British couldn't legally stop him.
So in 1933, Yu Tongsen builds a mansion right next to the Repulse Bay Hotel. But it wasn't just a mansion.
No, far from it. He built Eucliffe, which was this massive, sprawling, dark, Gothic castle.
We are talking stone spires, intricate stained glass, a greenhouse, and a private pool, which was an unimaginable luxury at the time.
It was a massive flex.
But my question is, why a Gothic castle? I mean, why didn't he build a massive traditional Chinese palace to show his heritage?
Well, that is the most brilliant part of his strategy. Academics view his choice as a highly intentional form of cultural appropriation.
Really?
Yeah, by building a Gothic castle that literally eclipsed the British hotel next door. He was speaking the colonizers' architectural language just to beat them in an argument.
Oh, that's wild. He was visually proving that a Chinese businessman could master and outspend the Europeans using their own aesthetic symbols of power.
Exactly. And the sources say his motivation was also deeply superstitious.
Right. A fortune teller had convinced you that as long as he continued building castles, he would literally cheat death. So he built 3 of them across Hong Kong.
It was a monumental projection of ego. He was trying to conquer the landscape, the colonizers, and mortality itself.
Okay, so for your next hidden gem, you have to use your imagination a bit because Eucliffe was torn down in 1988.
Yeah, sadly it's gone.
But if you stand on the beach and look to the high western cliffs, you'll see ultra-dense, modern luxury housing today, like the Opus building.
Right. When you look at those cliffs, I want you to just imagine a massive, towering Gothic castle looming over the beach.
Literally casting a physical shadow toward the British Hotel. But sadly for Yu Tongsen, the castle didn't cheat death. He died of a heart attack in 1941.
Yeah, and his death coincided with a historical earthquake that shattered both of these luxurious bubbles entirely.
Right. In December 1941, the illusion of control meets the brutal reality of war.
The Pacific War reaches Hong Kong, and all that curated luxury is violently erased.
The sources show that Repulse Bay went from being a playground for the rich to a vital military defense line, like overnight.
Because of its geography. It blocked the road between Wang Nai Chun Gap and Stanley.
So you had British forces, specifically the Middlesex Regiment and the Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps, trying to hold the line against the Japanese invasion.
And this creates one of the most jarring juxtapositions in the entire history of the Bay.
I can't even imagine.
From December 20th to the 23rd, hundreds of high society figures, hotel guests, and retreating soldiers were trapped inside the luxury hotel while heavy combat raged outside.
I mean, try to comprehend the emotional whiplash of that space. You have people drinking tea among 2,000 imported British roses one day.
Yeah.
And a week later, artillery shells are literally smashing through the stained glass windows above their heads.
The psychological impact of that contrast was profound. It actually inspired the famous writer Eileen Chang.
Oh, I've heard of her work on this.
Yeah, her literary reflections on the concept of ruins and the collapse of civilization draw directly from the trauma of watching that specific hotel being torn apart by war.
And Yutong Sun's Gothic castle right next door suffered an even darker fate, didn't it?
It did. The records show that Eucliffe ironically became an execution ground.
Wow.
On Christmas Eve, Japanese troops bayoneted Allied prisoners of war right there on the grounds of the castle.
The trauma embedded in that land had massive legal implications after the war, too.
It really did. The atrocities at the castle and the hotel were committed by the Japanese 229th Regiment under Commander Tanaka Ryosaburo.
Right. And when the war crimes trials began, the Tanaka Ryosaburo case, officially filed WO 2351030, became a landmark event.
It was incredibly significant
Why was that specific legal case so important?
because it set a vital legal precedent for what military law calls command responsibility.
Meaning the commanders are on the hook.
Right. The prosecutors didn't just have to prove that crimes happened. They had to prove that a commander was responsible for the atrocities committed by his subordinates within a very specific geographic area.
So the geography of Repulse Bay itself, like the proximity of the hotel to the castle, the lines of sight, became a crucial piece of legal evidence to prove the commander knew what was happening.
Exactly. The layout of the bay actually convicted him.
That is wild to think about, and that brings us to one of the most incredible hidden gems on this entire deep dive.
Yes. If you walk down to number 60 Repulse Bay Road today, you will find a very flashy, high-end supercar showroom.
Which looks totally normal for a modern luxury area.
Right. But the urban planning records confirm that in 1941, that specific building was the hotel's garage.
And on December 20th, it was the site of the absolute most brutal hand-to-hand combat of the entire siege.
The Japanese had taken the garage, and British troops launched a desperate counterattack straight across the road to rescue their captured comrades.
And that supercar showroom is the only surviving 1920s original hotel annex left standing.
It is literally a silent witness hiding in plain sight. The walls displaying those luxury cars are the exact same walls that absorbed that extreme violence.
So, capital built the bay, and the war completely destroyed it. After the dust settled, how did everyday people eventually reclaim it?
Well, in the post-war decades, mass tourism starts bringing working-class locals to the beach. They finally had access to this once exclusive space.
But more people meant a sharp increase in drownings.
Yes, and according to the academic report, that triggered a massive cultural and religious crisis.
This is where we see a fascinating intersection between grassroots religion and public safety.
It really is. In the 1950s and 60s, the local fishermen in the area held a very strict, deep-seated taboo about drowning. They genuinely believe in something called a substitute ghost.
But what exactly is a substitute ghost?
The belief was that a person who drowned became a water spirit trapped in the bay. The only way that spirit could reincarnate was to drag someone else down to take their place a substitute.
Oh, wow. So they were terrified of the water spirits.
Right. Therefore, the fishermen believed that if you jumped in and saved a drowning person, you were stealing a victim from that ghost.
So if you intervened, the spirit would be enraged and come for you instead.
Exactly.
So you have this terrifying scenario where people are drowning, lifeguards are trying to set up operations, but the local community is terrified to help or even actively opposed to rescue efforts out of pure fear.
It was a massive hurdle. The Hong Kong Life-Saving Society, which was founded in 1956, officially set up their base at Repulse Bay in 1964.
And they realized they couldn't just use logic to fight this taboo. I mean, how do you convince someone to risk the wrath of a ghost?
Well, you don't. You fight the ghost with a higher divine authority.
It is such a brilliant sociological strategy. In 1970, the Life-Saving Society built a giant statue of Tin Hao, the revered Chinese goddess of the sea.
Right, but they didn't just put her up for decoration.
No. The official plaque explicitly defined her as the drowning rescue god.
It was an absolute masterclass in psychological engineering.
Yeah. By declaring that saving a life was officially sanctioned by Tin Hao herself, the Life-Saving Society provided their lifeguards with absolute moral and divine legitimacy.
It completely bypassed the fisherman's taboo. The logic was, if the goddess of the sea demands you save them, The lowly water spirits can't retaliate against you.
Because you were under divine protection. So they essentially hired the gods as their PR department to literally save lives.
So that's exactly what they did. And the archives showed they didn't stop there. By 1973, they had added a totally chaotic mixed bag of deities to the beach.
Yeah, you had Guanyin, the Dragon King, the god of wealth. I mean, it wasn't about pure theological consistency at all.
No, not even slightly. It perfectly captures the pragmatic, better safe than sorry religious mindset of grassroots Hong Kong.
It is functional religion.
Yes, it served a very specific, literal life-saving purpose for the community. They just wanted every possible spiritual base covered so the lifeguards could do their jobs without fear.
Which brings us to our final hidden gem. If you walk to the eastern end of the beach today, you'll find the Zhenhai Pavilion Park.
And tourists go there all the time to walk across the famous Longevity Bridge because there is a gimmick that says crossing it adds 3 days to your life.
Right. But the hidden truth is that this whole complex isn't a traditional temple at all. It is literally the official training headquarters for the Hong Kong Life-Saving Society.
Those statues aren't just tourist traps. They were the psychological anchors for old-school lifeguards who were risking their lives in the water every single day.
Wow. It really changes the way you look at the space.
It does. If we synthesize this entire journey through the sources, what Repulse Bay really reveals is a fascinating cycle of spatial identity.
Yeah, you start with delocalization.
Right, the British imposing a fake intimidating name, importing European roses, and using health laws to pretend they aren't in Asia.
And then you have transnational capital trying to beat them at their own game with a Gothic castle.
But eventually you have relocalization. The local people building tin house statues and reclaiming the beach for everyday use.
It shows a totally unique societal model. Elites and capital build the roads and the infrastructure, but when tragedy and trauma hit, it is grassroots religion and the local community that step in to actually heal the space.
It completely reframes the history of the bay.
It changes the way you look at a beach towel and a sun umbrella, doesn't it?
It really does.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, one that takes this history and applies it to our future. The next time you find yourself relaxing in a beautiful, highly curated coastal vacation spot, look past the expensive cafes.
Yeah, look at what's really there.
As climate change and rising sea levels inevitably force us to rethink and reshape these highly contested coastlines, ask yourself, who will get to decide what gets saved? Will it be the modern billionaires in their high-rises fighting for their visual corridors, or will it be the grassroots communities who actually work the water, stepping in once again to heal the space?